Good morning once again, and welcome back to the first session, first technical session, and we start with Hans Kuhl's lecture. And to run the session, I would like to request Professor Scott F. Barnes to chair the session, please. And I would like to request Dr. Ranjan Kumar Dahal to serve as the co-chair of this lecture session. Yes, please. Okay, this is so, have to sit. And I would like to give a very brief introduction of the chair and co-chair. Of course, you know Professor Scott Barnes. He's past chair of the Department of Geology at Portland State University, and he has been teaching for the last 43 years, and he has a large number of publications which I don't actually need to mention here, more than 100 publications, and has over 25 research grants. He has written two books, Environmental Groundwater and Engineering Geology, application for Oregon, and his second book, Cataclysm on the Columbia, the Great Missoula Flood, which is this book. I bought it when I was in Oregon State University, and I would like to have your autograph at the end of the session.
We will do that, good.
And of course, he's the president of the IEAG now. A lot of things, it takes a long time. When I go through his CV, thank you, Professor Scott Barnes, please chair the session.
Okay.
And next, of course, very brief introduction about Dr. Ranjan Kumar Dahal. Of course, most of you know who Dr. Ranjan Dahal is. Professor Scott Barnes and Professor Wu. This morning already talked about Dr. Ranjan. He's the National Coordinator of Nepal, IEAG National Coordinator and co-convener of this conference. And he's Associate Professor of Engineering Geology in Tribhuvan University. And where we have Himalayan Geodisaster Research Center at Central Department of Geology, Tribhuvan University. He has been visiting professor at Kagawa University, Japan. Associate Chief Editor in Geo-Environmental Disaster, and fellow academician of Nepal Academy of Science and Technology, of course, another one. And he was a JSP Japan Society for the Promotion of Sciences Research Fellow, and so many things. And most importantly, this conference would not have been possible without hard work and commitment of Dr. Ranjan Kumar Dahal, and I would like to request you to give a big applause of hands, and I would like to request to run the session, starting with the brief introduction of the presenters. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hans Kloos was one of the organizers of the International Association of Engineering Geologists in the Environment over 50 years ago. And so we've named it after him. This year it is going to Reşat Ulusay from Turkey. We're very excited about that. He has an incredible career of over 42 years, and he's got a perfect career in engineering geology. First of all, he has got the practical area, his first 22 years. At that particular point, he ran the Mineral Research and Exploration Institute for Turkey. Then he became a president at a university, and for the last 20 years he has been a professor there, using all the experience that he gained in practicality, bringing it to the students there. In his 42 years, he has written over 5 books, 2 dictionaries, and over 300 papers. He is also an editor not only for IEAG, but also Rock Mechanics. And he is the new president of ISRM, that is the International Society of Rock Mechanics, one of our sister societies. And so he has a career that has been unbelievable. He's worked in engineering, geology, also rock mechanics, and then geoengineering and applying all of these things. He has this great practicality and professorial background. He is well suited for this award. And at this time, I would like Reshad to come forward. We will present him the medal and the award, and then he will give a talk at the end following in your particular area. So how about a round of applause for Reshad Ulasay? Here is his award. Oh, isn't this beautiful? So here is the, let's see if we can get this, Hans Kloos medal. They're still taking pictures.
Namaste. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to thank Professor Barnes for his kind introduction. And it's a great honor for me to have been chosen as the recipient of the IEAG Hans Kloos Medal. The society, IEAG, has meant a lot to me at various stages of my professional life, so receiving this IEAG award has special significance for me. So I would like to thank the IEAG board for selecting me to receive this award, and also the Executive Committee for Turkish National Group who nominated me this award. And also thanks for the kind hospitality to the organizing committee and National Society of Geology of Denmark. And I wish you a successful conference. Thank you very much. The presentation is geoengineering aspects of the structural stability and protection of historical man-made structures, rock structures, an overview of Cappadocia region in Turkey in the UNESCO's World Heritage List. The topic that I selected backs to 1990s, when I and my dear friend Professor Aydan began to work in Cappadocia region to provide some scientific and technical issues which will help to the protection of historical rock structures in the world. Therefore, I selected this topic to introduce you today. First of all, let me give you the content of my presentation. We'll start with the introduction, characteristics of Cappadocia region, in other words, geographic climate and environmental conditions in the rock structures, and geology and seismicity of the Cappadocia very briefly, and in situ characterization and short and long-term material properties of the host rocks in Cappadocia, and geoengineering problems in Cappadocia, and stability assessments for selected cases or rock structures, and possible measures for remedial or protection studies in Cappadocia and the conclusions. Let's start with introduction. You know, from the dawn of civilization, underground space has long been very important and used through the history of the life of people, particularly for human accommodation, religious ceremonies, defense against enemy attacks, and protection from climatic conditions, and storage of agricultural products, etc. Particular residential use probably present the oldest use of underground space. In this picture you see an example from Iran, Andaman houses, commonly used as residential purposes. And these are the other examples from different parts of the world, which are our historical cultural heritage, such as from United States, and also from Turkey, Iran, and Azerbaijan, and China, and Turkmenistan, and Israel, and Spain, and from North Africa. Okay. Although some of these structures and historical rock settlements preserve their structural integrity. Some have been mainly affected by weathering and some natural hazards such as volcanoes, landslides or earthquakes, and also by human activities. As a result of this, they suffered some damage, as you see here.
Wow.
Oh. Fortunately, some damage from Leybela in Ethiopia and a ferry chimney, collapsed ferry chimney from Cappadocia, Turkey, you see. You have to push. I think there's a problem with this. The pointer, another pointer, yeah. Here you see erosion in the toe of a natural slope, which results in a slope failure, also rock falls, and also the weathering effects in the pillars. Asbestos, please. And cultural heritage represents the traces of human being of the planet Earth and are the evidences of thousands of years of human activity to adapt our living conditions to environment. Therefore, both protection of their structural integrity, stability, and minimizing the effect of internal and external factors on them have vital importance for all nations because they are natural heritage. But these are complex issues and requires expertise from different professions, such as archaeologists, architecture, conservation, and geoengineering, such as engineering geology, rock mechanics, and rock engineering. Yes. Let me give you some information, brief information about the region selected for the case of this study. It's a significant number of historical underground and semi-underground settlements and modern multi-purpose openings have been excavated in this region, in the central part of Turkey. And it's included in the World Heritage List in 1985 by the UNESCO as one of the 7 sites in the world. It's a plateau extending over at 40,000 square kilometers and is surrounded by three volcanoes here, first one, second one, and third one, but they are not active now. The Cappadocia is an international one of the most popular religions because it's not only due to its proximity to be historical heritage at museums, but also it's a historical and modern rock structures. In other words, it's a historical geoengineering laboratory. And also it's typical with its some special landforms. One of these landforms is the fairy chimneys. Here you see, these are the tough layers eroded by water and wind action created these very interesting landscapes. We call them fairy chimneys. Underground and cliff settlements in Cappadocia are very common because the surrounding tops of the Cappadocia has several daily and seasonal changes in temperature and thermal insulation properties of the Cappadocia tops. Their self-supporting properties and they provide defensive advantages against enemy attacks and also a superior resistance and production against other natural disasters. There are 22 unknown underground cities in Cappadocia. Some of them are self-supporting and they have 8 to 10 floors, as you see from this figure. You see some views from some of underground cities in Cappadocia. They are still intact and no failure problem to be experienced. Short and long-term mechanical properties of the host rocks surrounding the historical rockhead structures in the world and geoengineering problems associated with the structures with prime emphasis on the Cappadocia and environmental conditions in the region. Of course, in addition, some case studies are included in this lecture to emphasize the importance of geoengineering.
Very briefly, geology and seismotectonics of Cappadocia. The Cappadocia, as I mentioned before, is surrounded by 3 old volcanoes, and all geological units were produced by these volcanoes. Here you see the geology map of the study site, the region. It's a general underlying volcanic rocks by Neogene and Quaternary age, and this is the axis of this area. This volcanic sequence, generally dirty white, gray, pink in classic character, and shows an alternative from fine grain to coarse grain types of pumice and obsidian, and at some places interpreted with clay and marley clay beds, and is nearly horizontal, no so much tectonics, and with age ranging from Neogene to Quaternary. Here you see the tuffs of this sequence. These are known as Cappadocia tuffs. They are soft tuffs, and some of them are welded tuffs and easy to carve. And 5 of them are very important because all these man-made rock hand structures are located in these tuffs, starting from Kızılkaya at the top, and Gördeles tuff, another one Cemilköy tuff, and Kavak and Zelva tuff. Zelva tuff is the weakest one. Let me talk about the environmental conditions in and outside the rock hair structures. The climate in Cappadocia is typical continental climate, hot summers and cold winters, and process of freezing and thawing accelerates the failure degradation of the rock types. Here you see in December, January and February freezing occurs, but except these months no freezing occurs because this is very important for the degradation of the rocks. In this study, we installed some equipment at various parts of the area to monitor the variation of temperature and humidity at the outside and inside the rock and structures to assess the effect of weathering conditions in the field. Here you see temperature and humidity recorders. Let me show you some examples taken from some rock and structures. This is a hotel caved in a rock. As you see, from outside, both humidity and temperature shows a big fluctuation, but inside, the fluctuation is minimal. Therefore, it's a big advantage for this kind of structures. And the second example is from a secret storage cavern. They generally store here fruit and other things. Here you see there is no any fluctuation at the bottom, as you see inside the cavern, but outside both humidity and temperature shows big fluctuation depending on the season. Last example from a 7th floor underground city. Here you see, and the orange dots indicate the location of the temperature and humidity measurements. And here you see on the outside big fluctuation represented by red color, but inside the fluctuation is minimal in the 5th and 7th floor of the underground city. Therefore, people prefer to live in these environments in the past. And today, why? We use them as fruit or potato storage. It is clear from these measurements. Into characterization and short and long-term material properties of the tuffs in the Cappadocia. Bedding planes are nearly horizontal and very thick. In other words, this continuity spacing is very large, although the material is very soft. 2 natural joints, which are cooling joints, are observed in the rock. Sometimes the 3rd one appears, and here you see it's still a projection. And these are the photos taken from some other parts of the Cappadocia. Variation of index properties of some Cappadocian tuffs that are shown in this figure. Here you see we perform Schmidt test, new test, needle penetration index test, which is suggests variation in depth. In other words, we can say that the index properties of these halves are more or less same. Needle penetration test is a new and non-destructive index test, particularly this the uniaxial compressive strength and the needle penetration index. It gives a good estimate for the US uniaxial compressive strength. When we look at the long-term mechanical time-dependent behavior of such materials are very important, and generally they are ignored in engineering applications. First one is effect of water content. Water content migration tests were carried out at different parts of the stud site due to the volumetric strain variations induced by the absorption of and desorption of the water. Mechanical properties of the tubs change. Increasing the number of cycles results in increase. Here you see the effect of saturation on the reduction in the uniaxial compressive strength. Young's both in UCS and Young's modulus of the Zelgata is more critical. Effects of atmospheric conditions. We know that there are three main tests assessed under discussion. These tests represent the field conditions on Earth. However, standards suggest two standards, two cycles, ISRM also two cycles. But it doesn't have the decreases here. Otherwise, you can obtain very small. Here you see Zelgatov. We selected the previous one, which is clay one, cycle 2, cycle 5, cycle 8, and cycle 10. Here you see the after 37, after the fourth cycle, the decrease in the strength is about 37%. Effect of freezing towing. Here you see fifth cycle and 10th cycle. You see decrease in UCS and weight after freezing towing cycles here. If the samples are dry, no effect due to freezing and thawing. But when the rocks are wet, in wet condition, you see a sharp decrease in the weight and UCS occur. Therefore, we again should consider the moisture condition of the rock in evaluating these type of rocks. Acoustic emission measurements conducted on the Zelgatov samples to investigate the fracturing phenomenon suggest that saturation of samples, here you see we add water, drastically reduces the creep failure when compared to the dry state. Therefore, creep test also indicated or emphasized that moisture is important. Preservation of the existing rock-hard structures and their stability and the future use of new underground openings in the tuffs are considered as the most important geoengineering aspects in Cappadocia. Instabilities observed in this region are considered to be mainly associated with deterioration of the tuffs, weathering, structural discontinuities with high persistence, loss of overall strength of rock mass due to wetting, drying, and freezing and thawing cycles. We use 20 stainless steel. Here you see the amount of spanning, slapping was between 20.29 and 2.25 millimeters between 2007 and 2011, about 4 years. If you assume that annual erosion is homogeneous, of course it's not homogeneous, it's range between 0.808 and 0.77 millimeters. Openings commonly observed, as you see here, 3 discontinuities intersect each other and a big wedge occurs at the roof of opening and then fall down. These should be carefully investigated and protected. Shearing and erosion of pillars. Here you see shear failure and the pillars left in the openings, and it's very strange that due to weathering or deterioration, erosion occurs in the pillars and they lose their bearing capacity. Then openings next to cliff will fail. But in case of fairy chimneys, the same situation will occur about when the overburden reaches to about 14 meters. In such a case, we can conclude that openings next to cliffs are more likely to fail in long term as compared with the fairy chimneys. This is the mesh, original mesh, and the first erosion, second erosion, and final erosion. And in the case of 100 years, no considerable change in terms of shear and tensile stresses occur. And after 500 years, in the first stage analysis, due to tensile stresses developing here, some slabs with thickness of about 50 to 60 centimeters will occur, and these slabs will tend to be away from the original wall. And at the end of 5,000 years, you see here displacement vectors suggested that the rock slabs expected to occur here, and due to the tensile stresses, will be separated from the main rock body and then will fall down, and as a result we will observe such a cave here, and it means that this slope will lose its support strength and will fail. The maximum displacements expected develop in the slope phase on 500 and 1,000 years scenarios. A second example is from analysis of an opening prone to spelling. The aim was to assess the occurrence of spelling in semi-underground openings in the first valley of Zelda open pit region. Here you see that the maximum principal stress developed at the end of the opening, and then here you see the maximum displacement vectors, and these vectors suggested some revenue from the walls of the opening. Here you see, maybe the picture is very small, you cannot clearly see, that some revenue material accumulated here is very clear, and the results show a good agreement with the observed failures. And what kind of possible measures for protection and mitigation? Also, we visited Kathmandu city 2 days ago. We observed that some buildings only constructed by field bricks fail, but if they have some timbers, they protect some parts. Rock bolting is possible in Cappadocia. It's questionable because the use of tuffs are soft and prone to weathering. And second, corrosion due to high moisture content of the tuffs may be harmful for the rock bolts. And due to large stiffness difference between the bolts and tuffs is another problem. And application and performance of bolting is still questionable, and further studies are necessary to answer a correct answer for the application of rock bolting in this site. Spraying protective shotcrete layers is another solution, but here you see a church, a Nazar church, before the restoration and after the restoration. Unfortunately, it is extremely difficult to apply this because due to aesthetical considerations, you can obtain a very ugly, very bad view of this. Reinforcement of rock pillars having fractures to reduce the compressive stress in them. Although this technique has not been applied in this region yet, but it can be very useful. You can erect metal pillars to support the data, and then fiberglass between these pillars can be mounted, and then the visitors cannot touch the pillars. And the other one is rockfall protection measures. This is one of the examples from Cappadocia. It's very useful, and it protects the small rock falls, and also there are some openings, evacuated openings, and there is a church just above it. It can be dangerous if they collapse for the church. We can fill these unused small fillings, small caves with some filling materials. Soft measures are the protection of the entry of the people or tourists to underground caves. If they are still dangerous, it should be protected. And the entrance of these caves should be prohibited. These measures proved to be effective when the gate to church collapsed. Because before it collapsed, they put these fences and it was forbidden to go in there, and then it collapsed, nobody lost their life or injured. As a conclusion, when the strength of dry and saturated tough samples are compared, the ratio of decrease in strength between 1/4 and 1/5, and this trend is similar in strength and deformability properties. In other words, moisture variations in these stuffs is very important in terms of remedial measures. The presence of a good relationship between the uniaxial compressive strength and needle penetration index suggests that the needle penetration test can be used for such rocks and such places where the sampling is not allowed. Amount of erosion in the Cappadocia region determined between 1.07 and 6.21 millimeter for 5 years and is considerably important. But it is extremely difficult to prevent it, of course. The instabilities are mainly associated with deterioration or weathering of the tuffs, discontinuities with high persistence, and decrease in wall strength or overall strength of the rock mass due to wetting, drying, and freezing and thawing. The strength of rock is reduced drastically under saturated conditions during the freezing and thawing, but we know that only 3 or 2 months freezing and thawing will be effective in this region. Therefore, drying and wetting processes are more important in the deterioration process of these tuffs. When the strength of dry and saturated tuff samples are compared, the ratio of decrease in strength, sliding and falling of rock blocks, bending and toppling, and erosion, spalling and sloughing are very important factors negatively affecting the stability of these caves in the region. It can be expected that instabilities may occur during rainy seasons, both increasing water content in the tuffs, which mechanical properties may drastically drop. Preliminary stability assessments based on the simplified modes suggest that openings next to cliffs are more susceptible for failure when compared to the fairy chimneys. Based on the numerical analysis, since the high stress concentrations occur at the corners and at the mid of the openings, depending on the wetting and drying process, the failures are expected to occur in rainy seasons. Rock mass classification systems are not sufficient to be used in such historical places. Based on these conclusions, necessary stabilization and protection methods should be investigated to preserve these historical places. As a last slide, I want to show you this. You can find all details of this lecture in this paper, which was online available in last week in our journal, Bulletin of Engineering, Geology and the Environment. It will be published in the first or second issue of the next year of this bulletin. I want to finish my presentation with a photo taken from a restaurant cave in Fairy Chimney. Thank you very much for your kind attention and patience.
And Dr. Ranjan Kumar Lal for co-chairing the session. We have a small token of appreciation, and I would like to pass to the chair and co-chair.
I have something for you. My side.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keynote presentation session. For this keynote session, I would like to request Dr. Vikari to be a chairperson of the session and Professor Suman Fan as a co-chair. And we have two rapporteurs also for this session, and I request Bharat Bhandari and Mr. Govinda Pathak to be as a rapporteur in the team. And I'll give you a brief introduction to our chairperson, Dr. Vikari, the convener of the IEAG and the immediate past president of Nepal Geological Society. And he served the General Secretary, he served Nepal Geological Society as the General Secretary and the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Nepal Geological Society. And he also served, he was a Fulbright doctoral research fellow in Oregon Climate Change Institute, Oregon State University in 2003 to 2011, and he is the JSPS postdoc fellow from 2003 to 2005. He received the Royal Highness Prize, Prince Youth Science and Technology Award from Nepal Academy of Science and Technology, and he is currently the Associate Professor of Geology in Kirun University. And Professor Suman Fan is my very good friend. She is working in the State Key Laboratory of Geohazard Prevention, SKLGP, Chain University of Technology, for research focused on understanding the mechanism of different types of geohazard, especially in earthquake induced landslide, post-earthquake effects, and risk assessment. Fan obtained her PhD from ITC, New Zealand, University of Twente in Netherlands in 2013. She had also been working on year for United Nations for training research in Geneva as disaster risk reduction training network. She had more than 20 ISI labeled high impact factor citations. Very wonderful research she's doing. Okay, now the floor is yours, Chairman. You can start with your job.
I welcome Professor Scott Bond for the presentation, keynote presentation, and his topic is a major role for engineering geologists and geotechnical engineers internationally help produce resiliency plans for major hazards, with an example from Oregon, USA. Before requesting him for a presentation, I would like to add a little more because I will introduce him. And a little bit extended version of his introduction is already posted on the conference website. You can reach it over here. Most of the international participants are already familiar with the Professor Bonds. And for Nepalese colleagues, you can visit the website and a little bit, not only the IEAG, in addition to that, Professor Burns has membership in over 20 professional organizations and is most active in the AEG, GSA, AATT, and SSSA. I would like to request Professor Burns for presentation, and the total time is 30 minutes and 25 minutes for presentation and 5 minutes for question and answers. Thank you.
And what I would like to do is reach out to all engineering geologists here and say that we have more than a role of just doing research. We need to convey our message and our ideas onto policymakers in order to get things done for society. So this is where I live. I live in Oregon in the United States. We are a town with many volcanoes. If you just see all of the very small bumps here, these are small volcanoes, and then we have a much bigger and acidic volcano that we have got there. So what I would do today, I'm just going to give you one slide just talking about IEAG because I'm president. But then we're going to talk about geodisasters and the role of engineering geologists around the world. That's the topic of the conference today. And then how do we communicate? Communication is one of the most important things that we have. And I'm going to give you an example from Oregon where I do a lot of communications with the general public and with the government. And then in the end, if we have time, then we will do talk a little bit about resilience plan, how we do this. So IEAG is celebrating its 53rd year all around the world. Many of you are members, some of you are not, and I encourage you to join us, the 4,100 members around the rest of the world, doing applying geology, site evaluation, geohazards, those are the heart of everything that we do. And then we are going to be having our Congress coming up next year in San Francisco. If you get a chance to come to that, we love it. We have a great bulletin, we have commissions, we have newsletters, regional conferences, websites, many more. So geodisasters, this is the topic of our conference today. What are the ones that we are involved in? Well, obviously, we have got lots of earthquakes and landslides all over this country. And then also, and especially down in the southeastern part of Nepal, you have many, many floods. Not many volcanoes here, but around the rest of the world, we have those tsunamis. And those are the 5 major geodisasters that we are involved in. But around the world, we also have other disasters involved with hurricanes, typhoons, and droughts. Hurricanes and typhoons give great amount of flooding. Drought is the opposite thing, and we have subsidence that is associated with that. Wildfires and windstorms are also part of the things that we deal with. And our roles in all of these disasters, we need to communicate the chances of these disasters to 2 groups of people. Number 1, we need to take our findings that we make in the laboratories and then in the field and with LIDAR, etc., to governmental agencies. Because governmental agencies are very important because they build better building codes and also better land use planning. Where to build, where not to build. Secondly, we need to communicate all of our ideas to the general public. They need to be aware of all of these things. And we do this through television, we do this through radio, through talks and newspapers that we have got. And then what we should help people do is prepare this and prepare a resilience plan in case of that large major disaster that we have got. So for the government, when we are talking to the government, infrastructure is the key. The roads, the railroads, the airports, the transmission lines. And then we need to have them have the codes to deal with the geodisasters that we are dealing with and the infrastructure that is there. They are the ones that are going to be making the land use laws. And they need to understand geology. We are the transmitters of information to the people who are making the decisions. Very important. We also need to talk about probability and risk. What is the percentage of these particular hazards happening? And then risk is including infrastructure and people that you have got and the value that you have got. They have very little money. So where do you spend money? You spend it where you can get the biggest and most effective part. And so they will take all of those things. So our communication to the government, very important. To the public, the general people that you have in all of our countries around the world. We want them to be prepared for all of the geodisasters that we have got. They might need to know what is the potential for a flood, for a volcano, for a landslide, for an earthquake. And then the probability of each one of those geodisasters. At home, they need to be prepared for some of these things. They need to have a storage of water and food. They need to have structures that are there that are very, very important. And then if it's really bad, how to evacuate, how to leave. They also need to work with their neighbors because in case of a big geodisaster, the first people to respond and to help them are going to be their neighbors. And then if you have a business, and this is one thing we as geologists forget to tell people, is that your business may be affected and you want that business to reopen. The business needs to have a resilience plan to reopen so they can, again, start making money and employing people. My goals for this past year are part is reaching out to the public and to everybody else. Just this past year, I gave 71 different talks about geodisasters and resilience plans. Earthquakes, landslides, floods, tsunamis, volcanoes are the main ones that we talk about. I also do a lot of work with the televisions, the radios, the newspapers, and things like that. 33 different days this past year. And then I go to the conferences, 14 different talks that I gave around the world. So what I'm trying to do, all of us are involved here, we're trying to get people to get involved there, get the public, get the government more involved. So here's a map of the world. And this is a tectonic map of the world. I live right here in the United States. There's North America. We are over here. There's India. There's the Himalaya mountains that are here. And so we're right up here. And so North America is moving in this direction. And the Indian, Australasian continent is moving up here. And that's why we have the mountains growing bigger and bigger. That's why we have many, many earthquakes. Originally, there was a large plate that was out here that was being subducted underneath North America called the Farallon Plate. Now, it's just a little tiny one, but it produces subduction zone earthquakes. That is the topic of the example that I want to talk to you about for the next 15 minutes. So, for the last 25 years, I've been giving talks in my part of the world, right here, about the potential for a big earthquake. But one article in a magazine called the New Yorker magazine in the United States, they talked about the really big one. Said everything west of our major highway that we have there will be toast. That is English for, and everything's falling apart here. Okay, there we go. And then we would be a major disaster. 13,000 people dead, 27,000 injured, and the worst natural disaster in North American history. People started saying, wow, this is the potential that is here. And as a result, awareness. One article in a magazine led to increased awareness, and so we give many, 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 many other talks. Why are we concerned about it? This big disaster, we call it the big one. And these mega thrust faults are the subduction zone quakes that we have got. We never thought in my state that we had an earthquake problem. No codes, no design by governmental regulations for building anything. So we had and it wasn't until 1994 that we started doing that. So we have a lot of work to do, and so talks that I try to give to the public, getting people ready at home, the neighborhood, businesses, and in cities, very, very important. So subduction zone earthquakes are the biggest earthquakes in the world. We also call them mega thrust quakes. This is where one plate is going underneath another one. And so we live on the edge. Now, if we look in the past history, in the last century, the last one that we had for the whole world was in 1964. That was the Good Friday earthquake up in Alaska. And the moment magnitude value was 9.2. That is, and then we went 40 years. The world had no subduction zone earthquakes for 40 years until 2004. Then we had the great one in 2004, December 26th. Indonesia, Thailand, India were all affected, 9.1. And then after that, we waited only 6 years for another one. Chile had an 8.8, and then only 1 year we had the famous Tohoku earthquake in Japan. So we had 3 in 7 years after waiting 40 years for this other one. We live on the Ring of Fire. This is where you get the greatest number of these. The Indonesian earthquake, 9.0, but over 280,000 people killed. Most of them killed because of the tsunami that we had there. But you also had landslides. You also had buildings falling down, etc. Secondly, in Chile, just 6 years later, 8.8. But it's the 7th largest earthquake in world history ever since the seismograph was invented. Another subduction zone earthquake. 800 people killed. The 2 most prepared countries in the world for earthquakes are Japan and Chile. And when you have a prepared country and 800 people killed, that's incredible. Chile is also the site of the largest earthquake we have ever had. That was 1990. That was a 9.6 just south of Santiago. And then there was the incredible earthquake of Tohoku, 9.0 in Japan on March 11th, 2011. And I still remember this because I was driving home late at night, and all of a sudden the television station called up and said, "We just had a 9.0 earthquake in Japan." I said, "Oh no, subduction zone earthquake, tsunami on the way, lots of destruction." But it's the next day in Oregon. And so I spent the whole night analyzing the video coming in from Japan of the tsunamis that were coming in. And incredible. And so you had older structures being destroyed, landslides there, many, many fires. Many of you remember the Fukushima meltdown of the nuclear power plant. Big problems. And this is the most prepared country in the world for earthquakes. Yet they had many thousands of people killed, lots of damage. And so people in Oregon, my state, would say, "Well, Scott, what is the big one going to be like?" I said, "Just look to Japan, because this is going to be what will be happening in Oregon. We need to get prepared." So back to Oregon. So here we have Washington, Oregon, California, San Francisco right down here. Next year, in September, our meeting. But we're up here, and about 300 kilometers off the coast, we have a chain of volcanoes at the bottom of the ocean, creating a plate that is moving in this direction. And then it is being subducted underneath the Pacific Northwest, creating a chain of volcanoes called the Cascade Mountains, all the way from Mount Lassen in California up to Mount Garibaldi up in Canada. And so in cross-section, you have got the Juan de Fuca plate coming underneath the North American plate, melting, coming back to the surface as a chain of volcanoes, and then uplifting all of the marine sediments along the coast, creating our coastal range. But what is happening is, as one plate is subducted underneath the other, it is locked. And it is locked all the way from here up to here, 800, 900 kilometers long, 50 to 100 kilometers wide. That is the lock zone. One plate is going down, the whole coast is being uplifted, and then when the earthquake occurs, there's no real epicenter. The epicenter is everywhere from here to here because of this very, very large zone that is being uplifted. When I moved back to my state of Oregon in 1990, not that long ago, here was the earthquake hazard map of the United States. This is the state of Oregon. Nothing. No earthquake hazards, because they were all based on past history, and there was no history of it. Everybody knows about California. Washington had a large earthquake up here. We were not prepared. Not prepared at all. This is what the modern earthquake hazard map looks like. This is based on geological deposits. So now we have a big problem to prepare for that large earthquake today. And so what are the three hazards that we need to be prepared for? Number one, ground shaking and then amplification. The greater the amount of sediment underneath the buildings, the greater the amount of the earthquake waves will increase. Liquefaction, I think everybody knows what liquefaction is. And then landslides, reactivation of landslides. We go out and map the old landslides. Rule of thumb that we have is if it has moved once, it has a high potential of moving again and reactivating either by large rainstorms or large earthquakes. And then along the shores, we have tsunamis. And so examples of those. This is a picture from Taiwan. And these are building codes that were not up to par, and as a result, damage to the buildings there. Liquefaction. The best pictures that we now have in the world from liquefaction are coming to us from New Zealand. Christchurch, where I used to live. And you would have sandy parrot material beneath the surface, high groundwater table. When it liquefies, it comes to the top. You have a sand boil that is there. Many of the streets got filled up with sand, as you can see here. The famous one from Japan, Niigata, Japan, 1964. Liquefaction of the soils underneath caused buildings to collapse. Here is a landslide. This is actually created by water, but many of the roads between the valley that I live in and the coast will be closed because all of the earthquakes that will be landslides that will be created on all of the roads. So the people that live along the coast need to be prepared for these earthquakes in the future. And lastly, tsunamis. This is what we thought. Used to think tsunamis would look like, with the sea having no waves, and the waves just rising up because they have a very, very large wavelength, and then breaking in. But what we now know from all of the videos from 2004 from Indonesia and India You have a flat area and then a wall of water 5 to 6 meters high coming in. People watching, oh, this is very interesting. Not a good idea, as it comes in. And so we have a much better idea of what is happening. So our state then started mapping for tsunamis in the past. We started looking for tsunami deposits. And the highest elevations that we had found were about 6 or 7 meters. But then we found some at basically 8 meters to 9 meters. And so now along our coast, as the highway goes along, once it drops below about 15 meters, it tells you you are into the tsunami hazard zone. And then when you rise up above that zone, then you're exiting the tsunami hazard zone. And if you're in that, then there are signs that say tsunami evacuation route, and how do we get away from that? If a tsunami occurs, we tell people, if you are living on the coast and you are knocked to the ground by a large earthquake, and it continues to go on and on and on, 3 to 4 minutes long, you don't need for the authorities to say, that was the big one, because it was. And you have 20 minutes to get to high elevation. So it's very important that they know that. And so we are trying to spread the word to people who are living in that particular environment. In my state in the past, you can see that there is no history of large earthquakes. There was one in the neighboring state in Olympia, Washington, but Oregon did not. So that's why we did not have building codes. We have mapped the faults that we have here in Oregon, but do we know if they're active or not? We don't. Most of them, we have no information. The state to the south of us, California, has been mapping earthquake faults for many, many years. They put this into a big system called Alcos Priolo. Now it has its problems, but it also has some really neat things. You put your address in, it will tell you all of the earthquake faults that are close to you, give it a name, when did it go off last time, what is the maximum size that you can expect, what are the setbacks that you have, and what is the recurrence interval. Californians know all about their earthquake faults. We don't, so we have a long way to go. And so where we live, the largest sizes that we can expect in the North American crust is about a 6.5. Out in the Juan de Fuca plate off of the coast, 7.3. Longer the fault, the bigger the potential. But at where the two plates meet, 9.0, those are subduction zones. Those are going to cause us the biggest problem. In 1994 or 1993, this is our state capital. And we have a Pioneer, Golden Pioneer on the top. It was knocked off of its pedestal, just only 35 centimeters. But the legislators said, oh, maybe earthquakes are possible here. And as a result, they started giving us some money to study it. This is my town. We have 3 major faults, one right here, one right here. My university is right there. And we have the mountains here, and on the other side, we have another fault that is there. But we don't know if they're active or not, but they have uplifted in the past. We started mapping all of the response of the soils. And you would have, based on those 3 different hazards that I mentioned just a few minutes ago. And so you can see the areas along the river, that's where you have your greatest amount of liquefaction, here. And then up in the mountains, this is reactivation of landslides. And then you say, oh, the yellow area is your lowest area. That's the best place to live. Well, if one geological hazard doesn't get you, another one does. This is where our highest values of radon happen to be. And so one is going to affect you in some way or another. So these Cascadia subduction zone earthquakes are incredible. 9.0 lasting 3 to 4 minutes long. What will happen is the whole coast, this is what we call coseismic subsidence, will drop 1 to 2 meters, and then it will be thrust towards Japan anywhere between 10 and 30 meters. That is what will cause the tsunami that 20 minutes later will come back and affect all of us on the land. I mentioned that down here, anywhere from 5 to 15 meters high. We will also have liquefaction, landslide, and shaking along the coast. And how do we put this whole story together? A great geologist named Brian Atwater noticed along the coast we have many forests that have died. And if you want to know when a tree dies, what do? You take the wood underneath the bark, and then you radiocarbonate it, and he did. And most of these dead trees, we called them the ghost forests, died about 300 years ago. He said maybe something occurred here. And then what he also did was also in the estuaries, these areas here, he would find buried A horizons in the soil using the organic material to date those. They also came out about that same period of time. And so he worked with Kenji Satake in Japan. And he said, look at we think that we had a big earthquake about 300 years ago. Could you check the tsunami records in Japan? And Japan is one of the greatest record-keeping countries in the world. And he looked at these, and he said, yes, there was one earthquake, a tsunami, in the year 1700. And the Japanese called it the orphan tsunami because there was no volcanic eruption and no earthquake in Japan at the same time. It came from afar away. And it was about 2 meters high from one end of the country to the other. We said, that's the one. You back calculate from 1,000 kilometers an hour of the tsunami's moving, and then you have to worry about the international date line. And we believe that in the year January 26, year 1700 at 9:30, that was when we had our last subduction zone earthquake. And so our recurrence intervals that we have got are about every 500 years. The last one was 317 years ago, 800 years, 1,100 years ago, before we used this through the dating. The last thing I wanted to mention is about building codes. And if you come to San Francisco next year, you will see the Transamerica building, which is the building that is built for any size earthquake in the world. You can see the counterweights that you have up here, etc. But in my state, we had no building codes until 1974. And then it was only in 1994 that we actually went to seismic building code 3 and 4, and then we actually had building codes. So houses built before that time had no building codes in it. I was appointed to a large commission from the state of Oregon to evaluate our state. And what are our biggest problems that we have? We have many problems. Because 75% of our buildings are not built to code. But all of our fuel, all of our gasoline, all of our diesel happens to be in one place in Portland on a terrace. It's all sandy parent material, high groundwater. That is liquefiable soils. If we have a big earthquake, all of this will flow into the river, and we have an environmental problem. Number one, it may catch fire, and that will float down the river where many houseboats are. And number three, we have no diesel and gasoline to fuel our recovery. Secondly, we have many of our bridges are not built up to code. They need to be retrofitted, and many of our schools are unreinforced masonry brick buildings that are structural. They will fall down. So we have a lot of need to do. And so our important ideas to take away is we try and get everybody to get earthquake insurance in case their house falls down or falls off of the foundation. Today we are much more prepared than we were in 1994. And we are getting people, schools, fire departments, police departments, hospitals, all to be ready and prepared for all of this. And this is working. Infrastructure, as I said, 75% of our infrastructure has a huge upgrade that we need to do. We're trying to get everybody to be prepared at home and prepare, and then also with their neighborhoods, and then businesses to also develop them. Today we still can't predict earthquakes, but we can be more prepared. That is the work of an engineering geologist, to reach out to the communities, reach out to the government, get everybody more prepared for whatever geo-disaster is going to be occurring in your area. And thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Burns, for giving time. And thank you for your marvelous presentation, giving new flavor, especially we people in the Himalaya who live in the polygonal zone, and of the geohazard at the age of the subduction zone. Thank you very much for your nice presentation.
I'm just wondering, you said that your codes, or in Oregon, you didn't consider the building codes regarding the earthquakes. So it means that huge number of buildings are prone to the earthquakes, and especially if it is governmental buildings or etc., it's easier to retrofit. So what would be the best way to initiate the retrofitting of existing buildings in your Oregon?
And so it has created a very, very large construction industry for geotechnical engineers and companies to retrofit buildings, strapping the foundation to the house, number one. My university, we have 50 buildings, and we've only retrofitted some of them. Many of them, you walk in and you see these big metal X's that are here in the building so the floors will not fall down. So it's a big industry, and we've learned from other countries around the world how to retrofit. That's very good. One more question?
These tsunamis that are generated not by earthquakes, but by submarine slides or landslide, big landslide, dumping into the ocean and then creating these hazards.
Yes, so the question is about tsunamis that are not generated by earthquakes, but submarine landslides. And we are learning so much about this. The oil industry has been helping us understand that. Fugro, one of the large companies around the world, because they are concerned about pipelines and offshore oil wells. One of the biggest ones that we have is in the central part of the Pacific. They mapped all of the Hawaiian Islands, and off of the coast there are hundreds of these mega landslides where half of an island will have fallen off. You can back calculate the size of the tsunami from those. They are incredible, and we're now finding those tsunami deposits all around the Pacific. And a great deal of research is going on in that area. That's very good. So thank you for the questions. I think everybody wants to hear the next talk, so we can go have lunch. Thank you. Have an absolutely great conference.
Professor Chigara obtained his PhD degree in 1987 from University of Tokyo with a dissertation on long-term gravitational deformation of rocks by mass rock creep. From 1982 to 1997, he worked for the Central Research Institute for Electronic Power Industry. He engaged in a lot of geological investigation for various electronic power facilities. His research on the weather mechanism of mudstone in the mountainous areas was awarded by the Geological Society of Japan in 1987. He moved to the Disaster Prevention Research Institute of Kyoto University in 1997. Since then, he has been actively engaged in the research on natural disasters induced by earthquake and rainfall. He has done a lot of research on rock weathering, long-term gravitational slope deformation, and slope development. I think a lot of people know him from his publications. He has been published 66 papers, 6 books, and 12 book chapters. And he was also the president of Japan's Society of Engineering Geology from 2009 to 2013. He is also a member of Science Council of Japan, chair of the Board of Engineering Education. He supervised the 13 PhD students, and he was awarded by the Commendation for Science and Technology by the Minister of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology in 2017 for his research on deep-seated catastrophic landslides. Now I would like to invite Professor Chigata to the stage to give his keynote speech. Thank you.
Good introduction. My name is Masahiro Chigata, and I'm from Disaster Prevention Research Institute, Kyoto University. And my title is Gravitational Slope Deformations that precede catastrophic landslide triggered by rainstorms and earthquakes. Actually, the keynote title somewhat different, but the content is the same. So let's have a quick look of deep-seated catastrophic landslides by earthquake. Okay, this is Chukan Ocean in Taiwan. This Hanokidara by that great earthquake in Japan. Rainfall induced. This is Shaolin landslide 2009. And this is Kakani landslide 2011 in Japan. All of them are highly mobile and occurs abruptly. So we need to predict potential signs. To do that, important thing is the deep-seated catastrophic landslides have preparatory processes. They do not occur suddenly, abruptly. They and they have been prepared for a long time. They include the mechanical processes, it's the gravitational slope deformation, and the chemical processes, which is the weathering. And they are important for bioclastics, power carbonate, and soft mudstone. The mechanical one forms topographic features as a precursor of a catastrophic failure. And the chemical processes goes on very silently in the depths, so no precursor topographic features. And rainfall-induced landslide preceded by mechanical processes rather than chemical processes. But earthquake-induced one preceded either of them. Today, I want to focus on this mechanical one and not go into chemical processes. There are many types of gravitational slope deformation, and not all are transformed into catastrophic failure. So before going to look at the detail of those landslides, just let me introduce the conclusions. I like to help to shorten the time. That is, a combination of topographic features and the geological structures can be a clue to predict the potential size of a catastrophic failure by earthquakes and rainfall. First of all, let me introduce epoch-making landslide induced by Typhoon Taras 2011 Japan. That showed the small scabs were made before catastrophic failure. Applying the LiDAR and removing the trees, it looks like this. And before that, they had a detailed data, and along the rim of the landslide, already a small scab was made. So there are no such an example of a landslide which had a detailed data before and after the landslide. So this is that landslide, and it's a rim of the landslide, and before that landslide it was like this. So removing this line, can you see a small dark line? So that indicates small, well-defined scabs already separated the surrounding area, separated the area from the surroundings. That means, yes, they were ready to go. However, another example is also a gravitational deformation with the dimple-like depressions, but it had no well-defined scabs. So I suppose it's not ready to go as yet. It's like such a small scab, like cracks just before failure, like this one. Now let's look at the gravitational slope deformation, and they have a characteristic features according to the relationship between the slope and the foliation. Look at the right figure. It's a slope, and small lines, foliations, like bedding and cleavage. And there are several types. One is a bending or toppling, occurring in a steeply dipping foliation. And second is buckling. And third is sliding. And then the other dragging, there are not so many, so I skip it. So first of all, look at the bending or toppling. This is a very, difficult toppling features in Swiss. As you see, it is very highly fractured. So that means highly permeable. So no pore pressure buildup. And probably not susceptible to a rainstorm. However, if it had a cruststone, thick cruststone is involved like this, it will inhibit water drainage. So water accumulates like this, and may lead to catastrophic failure by rain. So, how to find a thick brush zone? This is an example of a linear depression on which we see a brush zone here. And this linear depression and upward facing slope was made by the displacement along this brush zone. It is like a book with a slippery page shown in green. So linear depressions may be due to thick brush zone. This is an example of linear depressions controlled by brush zones in a slate area, Japan. You see many, say, north to south trending linear depression, upward facing slopes. They are fault brush zone, actually. And here, landslide was induced by rain. This is the brush zone along which a linear depression was made. There are also in many places linear depressions. It's an example in European Alps, south of Mont Blanc. And here, landslide of La Saxe. This is the La Saxe landslide, 600 meters high. And this is the extension of the linear depressions. Giovanni Grosta and others drew this profile in which they show morphostructures on the trench. I suppose they may be a fault brush zone, like I showed you before. Special toppling is susceptible to upface because seismic shading is amplified normal to the open fractures made by toppling. This was made written by Marzolati, and there's a set of fractures along open fractures made by toppling. And we see that the horizontal to vertical acceleration spectral ratio, that shading normal to those fractures are amplified. So, for the evolution of a fractal toppling to catastrophic failures, steep leak like this, and a thick brush zone may be necessary to be induced by rain, and the linear depressions, and a small head stops, separation from surroundings, and also a slope area at the slope. That means support from the downslope of the decrease. Now move to buckling. This is a schematic sketch of the buckling by rotational deformation. This is a base dipping to the right, and the gradually buckling like this, and finally buckle base slide down. I think buckling is one of the most unstable gravitational slope deformation. Now let's look at some examples. This shallow landslide by rain over Typhoon Morocco, Taiwan. These are buckle holes that appeared after the landslide of Shaolin. This is source area. At this point, we found a buckle hole. It used to be 85 meters from the surface before this landslide, and bedding deep to the right. And this port with a gouge like this is impermeable. Now move to the landslide by earthquakes. Also, this is Taiwan case, Chiltern Ocean landslide by 1999 Chichi earthquake. This slide taken after the landslide. You see a dipping to the left, 30 and 40, so this portion backward. Such a buckling phenomenon can be observed on a Google Earth image like this. So before this landslide, we found the trenches and the steps on this slope. This is another example. Chipping landslide induced by Wenchen earthquake. It made a landslide down. In the lower right, it's looks like this. It's very clearly seen the base backward like this. This is another example, Dagon Bowl, also a Wenchen earthquake. this is one of the largest historic landslides. This topography before the crater on the Google Earth image, and looking that area from upper right, it looks like this. Here you see a rooftop depression. That suggests a gravitational deformation preceding the landslide triggered by the earthquake. This is the topographic map of that Galambo landslide, and you see a bedding plane and a fold. So this landslide's mass was bounded by those ground features. This source area, bedding plane, and look at this area, it looks like this. So that dark layer is a fold. And this was made up after the landslide. And near the top of this landslide, we saw a linear depression like this, still remain. Now move to another one. It's a Ikeguchi landslide induced by an earthquake in Japan, 715, and making the profile is like this. The best green stone and shale sandstone depicted the left. And say on the right, on the east of this landslide, very similar features occur like this. So we see a head slab and steep slopes. It's a resistant bed of this yellow sandstone. So that's the sandstone bed broken by the earthquake shaking, and the whole mass slid down to make a landslide down. Actually, it was bridged and downstream flooded. Now, so the transformation from buckling to sliding, it is dependent on the attitude. If it's a low angle, maybe radius of sliding continues. But if there's an undercut, catastrophic failure could occur by an earthquake. And also a wide grass zone may be catastrophic failure by rain. However, if it's a high angle, probably catastrophic failure occurs by an earthquake or rainfall either. So buckling to catastrophic failure, deep slope underneath greener slope like this, and a small head start or risk of depression, and a slope area is lower slope. Now sliding. It's a landslide used by rainfall in Japan. The right one was the one I showed you before as a report making. Actually, these two landslides was like a twin, and here's a thrust fault, and these two landslides occurred with a sliding surface along this thrust fault. This is the geologic map of the orange ones landslide, and they occurred on a hanging wall of this long continuing thrust fault. Actually, the thrust zone was up to 6 meters. This is a sliding surface with an angular insignificant sliding surface. Actually, this was a fault surface with a crush zone like this. It's a weak and impermeable. This is the cross section of the Takatani landslide. And red line is a thrust fault, like that I showed you before. So run, and the government measured the groundwater tables, and they found that there are two groundwater tables above and below the thrust. So we suppose power pressure buildup might occur during the heavy rainfall. Actually, that typhoon brought about 2,000 millimeters rainfall. Now let's come back to the above. Many people will know that this Julian landslide occurred 2014 by rain. And looking at this area closely, it looks like this. You see many some water staining black lines. And here we found a fault like this. And from that fault we see water coming out. This black line is a fault. And also lower portion, many water standing lines and a step. So probably this is also a fault. The source area is the upper portion of that landslide. So during landslide had a sliding surface along the low and the fault, which likely can prohibit both flow and the cause of pressure buildup. Now move to the landslide induced by earthquakes. This is how the landslide in Taiwan, teach earthquake. Upper figure is a plan view and the lower is a profile. And the important point is just along the upper edge of that landslide before the landslide, there used to be a scarp, a small scarp. And also lower portion, it was undercut. So the evolution from sliding to a catastrophic failure, deep slope or deep caterpillar slope like this. So the base daylight downslope. This is another special case of landslide. Reactivation of landslides once collided to the opposite slope and then undercut. So once landslide occurred, collided to the opposite slope, then stabilized. But after that, the low portion was undercut and destabilized. And on that condition, earthquake triggered the slide again. It's very simple, but there are many cases like this. This is one example occurred by 2004 Chues earthquake in Japan. It blocked the river to make a landslide dam like this. Before that landslide, it's a therapy of aerial photographs before the landslide. We found a big old landslide scarp. And on the opposite side, we found a small mound, which is interpreted as a deposit of a previous landslide. So landslide was colliding to the opposite slope, then undercut, and the catastrophic failure by earthquake occurs. Deep slope over the cataclysm slope, the same as before. And in this case, large headscarp because of the previous sliding. And remnant deposits on the opposite slope can be found and undercut. This is the list of gravitational slope deformations that transformed into catastrophic failure, which we study ourselves. In the left column, precursory deformation, I talked about the bending or fracture coupling, sliding, and a special reactivation of the landslide. And geological structure, topographic features, and I showed you some examples of these landslides. So finally, I get back to the conclusion. So combination of topographic features and geological structures can be a clue to predict the potential size of a catastrophic failure by earthquakes and rainfalls. Thank you. Dhanyavad.
Thank you very much, Professor Tigata, for your great presentation with a lot of interesting and also famous landslide examples worldwide. I think landslide is a global problem, especially in the tectonically active mountain areas. And it's also a lot of concern of landslide research group, especially for the early warning prediction of landslides. I think Professor Tigata's talk really shed a light on understanding the mechanism of gravitational landslides. Now we have time for 2 questions.
First of all, thank you very much for the nice presentation, and you show a lot of examples. The buckling failure, flexural toppling, which may be divided into active and passive, which we define in the field of rock mechanics. These are not specialized in your field, but we have already defined this kind of failure mode. I'm just wondering whether gravity will be the only cause to call the Barton criteria or passive flexion topic. That may be different for my understanding. It may be due to earthquakes, or it may be during the process of mountain formation.
Thank you for your question. First of all, I talked about the flexion toppling that proceed very slowly, gradually. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, probably I understand the question. You mentioned about that the center toppling can occur just by gravitational force. Or no? Maybe I'm not getting it.
Active can be.
Active.
Active can be result of flexion toppling. Active flexion toppling may be caused by gravity, but passive flexion toppling failure cannot be caused by gravity.
Passive means gravitational.
The slope the left dips into the.
Okay. Yeah, pressure toppling occurs not only cataclinic slope but also, say, anaclinic, that's in-facing slopes. But anyway, they are steeply dipping variations.
Thank you for the nice presentation. So I'd like to ask you about the Jure landslide. You mentioned that it was because of the rainfall. We visited the landslide after a few hours of the occurrence, and I have observed huge clouds of dust coming out of the landslide. So the whole landslide appeared dry. So what was, I don't think the rainfall was the main cause of the landslide. Thank you. What is your observation?
Okay, thank you for your question. Actually, I just visited, say, 2 years later from that generation. So maybe some, say, condition changed. But in my opinion, even, say, just, say, the roughness just on that port crystallstone is, say, filled with water, but wholeness can move with large amounts of clouds. I think. But maybe some other mechanisms. Thank you.
I think we still have time maybe for 1 or 2 questions. Yeah, I see one there.
Thank you. Just is a query regarding for future, that is forecasting. What are the measures recommended just to monitor these landslides in different areas of your investigation? Thank you very much.
Okay. Monitoring, but I think before the monitoring, say we can find the potential sites from geology and detailed topography. But doing so, there are so many potential sites. So after that, we need to order it or make a ranking. Which one is the most, say, important one to be monitored. So after that, we can select the, say, important places and we can monitor.
So still no measures taken by your that is team or anything to
actually, ourselves do not do that, but say the government have been doing many monitoring, but most of them not published.
Okay.
But I believe if there's a topographic feature like those I showed you, when we measure very precisely, I'm sure we can detect maybe 0.1 millimeters per year, also very, very slowly.
By installing cheat measure or anything?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Boris and Professor Chia for outstanding presentations. Though it's a little late, but the audience had deep passions to listen to the presenters because of the content. We started in the west, west of USA and ended to the East Asia, Japan. Thank you very much to both the presenters. Thank you. Yeah, since they are sponsoring this conference, you will get some flavor of these two companies in our world. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Mani.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Maninda. I'm associated with Geotech Solution at the moment as an executive manager. So today, it is not a technical presentation. I will be explaining brief information about what our company is doing doing in Nepal. So, Trumer and Geotech Solutions, we are one of the main sponsors of this program. So today I'll be explaining briefly about what geohazard scenario in Nepal and need of innovation and mitigation and safety, innovation for mitigation and safety. Similarly, how Trumer is doing in geohazard management and how Geotech Solution is involved in geohazard management in Nepal. So if we see a global scenario as well as Nepal scenario, the geohazard events are on the rise in global scale as well as in Nepal also. So this is one of the examples. We have like flash floods, sinkholes, land subsidence, and then rock falls. This is due to earthquake. And then if you see the economic losses as well as human losses caused by these events, it's also on the rise. So we have to be very serious how to manage these kind of disasters to lessen the economic losses as well as human losses. Geotech Solution has been always advocating on innovative and effective approaches for the geohazard management. On this way, we found one of similarly, in context of Nepal, geohazard mitigation practices are always been compromised in the name of low cost. Whenever we have to mitigate something, the main constant we face is low cost, how to manage it with the low cost. So this is one of our major challenges, how to get out of this and incorporate newer technology, more effective technologies for the management of geohazards. So in this context, we met with Trumer and we had an agreement with Trumer Sultan, who has very specialization on natural hazard protection. They have solutions for rockfall, unstable slopes, shallow landslide, debris flow protection, bank erosion protection, and also for the avalanches. So, Trumer Sultan is a very competent and experienced partner regarding the barriers to protect from natural hazards. The company was established in 1991 in Austria, near Salzburg. So Trumer teams in Austria, Germany, Canada, United States, and other parts of the country also have very experienced engineers and geologists and technicians, and they develop innovative solutions that are implemented at their production in Obertum. So you can find the details at our booth that has been in the other room also. Similarly, they have been expert in managing slope as well as retaining debris, bank erosion problems, avalanches, debris flow problems. So this kind of like road safety, avalanches, so many work they have been doing for the natural hazard and geohazard, especially in the field of geohazard protections. So these are some examples of rockfall barriers. These are debris barriers, rockfall barriers. So, but the main highlight of this company is they have patent components. For example, they have patent to omega nets, AVT and GDB brake elements, which represents its robustness for the management of geohazard. So, in addition to that, they have full-scale test facilities for the protected structure, based on which they develop their new products also. Similarly, Trumer has an agreement with Geotech Solution, and we are incorporating this technology, this new technology in Nepal. Our main slogan is innovation for disaster management and sustainable engineering. So besides the geohazard management, we do other kinds of work also, like regular geotechnical works, core drillings and other things also, but we major focus on geohazard management. And it is located in Nepal, and it is now situated in Sanepa. It is a private company, and its main service is to generate awareness and provide consultation and solution for mitigating different geohazards by introducing So this is one city project we did recently completed in Botekoshi hydropower project. After the Gorkha earthquake 2015, they have a huge problem of rock falls. So we introduced Trumas rock barriers and other systems in this area to protect the downstream structures. These are some examples that we have completed projects. And also we are very challenging, because it's a very new technology, we are not very much know-how of this system. So we need to customize it according to our terrain also. So we have been doing very difficult work, but in a manner we can handle in our terrains. So we have also done like a little installation of this post, which is a very new thing for us. And the main thing, the main person behind this company is none other than Dr. Ranjan. He has been supporting us all the way from the beginning, and also because of his dynamic, because he's very dynamic and outgoing. We are also extending our services to international community. We are starting some consulting work in Uganda also. So we look forward. Thank you so much for your kind patience before this lunch, and we are open for collaboration also. Thank you so much.
Okay, now actually we are now in this station, keynote station. Thank you very much for wonderful. You did a wonderful job, Dr. Delapani, and of course Suman Fan. Now we have some appreciation, program appreciation. First, I would like to call Professor Skirtman to. I will give you some token of appreciation as a keynote speaker. For you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now next one is Professor Chihira, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we have a token of appreciation to our chair and co-chair also.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we finish our technical session.
Road?
Yeah. This is road, and this is also temporary gravel road up on.
But I think to maintenance.
悪さをしたり
まあここはそりゃそうですよね。だけど段差面そのものかっていうとちょっとわかんない。持ってる中で。
I invited all the institutions last week, and then I did the MCD tools and convert it into 80 kilometers.
Okay.
And this area lies here over here, MCD. And this area lies here in MCD. And then by this, I give the weight. So weight if you weight. So by combining all the weights,
Yeah.
警察からも本当によろしく言ってない。
यसमा पिजीको कन्ट्रोल भयो पिजी कन्ट्रोल यतापट्टि देखिन्छ तर ल्यान्डसाइडको डेन्सिटी त बढेको छ त्यो क्लियरली एउटा अफसेट छ
त्यही भएर पिजिए मात्रै चाहिँ ल्यान्डस्लाइडको लागि कन्ट्रोलिङ फ्याक्टर होइन भन्ने हाम्रो मेन एब्स्ट्र्याक्टको थिम हो।
यसले सिरा टेस्ट गर्ने होइन अनि यसले चाहिँ फेरि सो इन्ट्रेस्टिङ टेस्ट फर पनि जोड्दै पुग्ने रहेछ नि त penetration test means
So you don't really need to do it because you can reach most of the places with the backpack on the back, especially with hard reaching places. Otherwise, like you have the environmental platform, you can mount on the car on the back or on the top, whichever it moves. Where this is the reverse where it took like 10-15 minutes to take this data. So it was very quick.
It is generating point clouds.
What do you say?
It is generating point
yeah,
clouds.
this is the point cloud. This is the point cloud. So you see the precision is plus minus 5-10 millimeters.
In the strong earthquake area, before people construct the house is with wood. So we have a better strength and neutral deformation against the earthquake. But in the last 20 or 3 years, the people's life is getting better, but they destroyed the old house and built a new one. But they forgot it's a very strong earthquake environment. So that's a problem. There's another in past 10 years, China is constructing development very fast. But the seismic proofs and work is we pay a little attention to that. Now people have lessons from that and construction and road and bridge have the better.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
My name is Long Qi Li, and I'm from Chengdu University of Technology. My topic is rainfall failure mechanism and evaluation of bedding rock with inclined argillite in the bed. When the underground water seated in the position, the weak inner layer will become saturation, and the argillite in the bed will form. And this is a failure site of this kind of slope. We can see obvious cracks and fissures at the slope surface and the wrinkle of the slope. Calculate the quantized impact factor. Then we can introduce this kind of impact factors into the support vector machine method by training and dimensional reduction. We can train a decision-sealed black box, and we can adapt this black box to judge if the slope was failure. And by training, our accuracy can reach up to 89.6%.
Depending on the segment, the periods will be different. After this big event, now some authorities in Japan consider the most likely mega earthquakes. And the first one was anticipated to be Nankai earthquake, Nankai Tokai, Nankai East Nankai Tokai earthquake with a magnitude of 9. And recently, Ryukyu Islands are added to this one. The magnitude of the earthquake is 9.6. For northern part is 9.6, and the southern part is Ogasawara Trench 9.2. And this is from the Atomic Energy Regulation Authority of Japan. As a very recent estimation. These are different estimation by different people, so there is some kind of correlation. This is the view of the tsunami hitting the Tohoku region of Japan, I think nearby the Sendai region. Miyako Island and Ishigaki Island slip, and tsunami was for this reason. And some people says that the earthquake happened in the trench, and this was this close to the tsunami.
There were international teams, 60 of them. There were national teams, much less, not but with instruments. The international teams were well equipped with their food, with their water, with their canine dogs, with their machineries and everything. And the number of extricated people, the community extricated almost like 18,000 people alive from the rebels. The national SAR teams extricated well over 4,000 people, and all the rich international, very much our guests. They help us, they boost up our morale, they help us, they help even our national guards. But in their, the ratio is 1 international to 2 national to 10,000 community. That means let us take science, the knowledge, and the work to the people, and that is the ultimate reality that will help in this proportion. Thank you very much for your patience.
I have one question. Who approves the project to be constructed in your country?
It is right now in the peaceful time, let's say before the earthquake, there is a government agency under the Ministry of Construction and Urban Development. There is a Department of Building Construction and Urban Development, the authority for building code. The permit for the building construction is given by the municipality, respective municipality. Okay?
That they approve.
The municipality approves. The mayor approves the building design.
Even if the design is very poor, as you said in the beginning.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. That's what my question was there. Thank you very much.
I'm presenting some results of a project that was taking place in Kumbu. I will show you a few examples of earthquake triggered by the earthquake. So this is a map. I think the author is in this room. As you see here, also that there is no specific data related to Solokumbu, where I will talk about. But so this is an area where the elevation is intermediate, and with a strong contrasting monsoon seasonality, which is an additional factor to the disaster. What we did is field mapping before and after the event. We didn't know, of course, that the earthquake will happen. And then we cross-checked with some satellite images, and we interviewed the local population.
The first part is about the research background. As we all know, Professor Einstein is one of the big names in rock mechanics. He said in 1983 that discontinuity persistence is among the parameters most significantly affecting rock masses. Stress and is a problematic one. So it's of the major practical importance to study the failure process and the strength of rock masses with intermittent joints, such as tunneling, the stability of rock slopes, and other engineering problems. The crack pattern was observed in the rock materials with the intermittent joint. Two types of cracks are observed: wing cracks and secondary cracks. Wing cracks were recognized as tensile crack and initiated from the tips of the floor, while secondary cracks are generally described as shear cracks, and it was the extension of the floor. That's the figures of the three kinds of samples. How to add the floors? Just by deleting the bars in the desired location, as you can see in the three images. This slide shows how to compute stress on the shear box, because we can only obtain the force on the wall. The figure is cited from the work done by Colby and John in 2003. The linearity in the front part and brittleness after the peak stress. Its Young's modulus is 140 parts, and its actual compressive strength is 131 megaparts. It's similar to hard rocks like granite. Shear box and the tips of the floor. It fits with the theoretical result of rock fracture mechanics. There has a high non-uniform stress distribution in these 2 points, in these points. This slide shows the crack pattern changed by the normal stress increases. We can see true wing cracks initiated from the tips of the joints. There are also cracks initiated from the left and right walls. They are all the stress concentration points.
Vito from Italy, but currently at STIGP in Chengdu, China. So the title of my presentation, the one I submitted to this conference, is Calibration and Performance of Numerical Models to Simulate Recent Chimo Landslide in Sichuan, China, and Assess the Secondary Hazard. But how to check for chances, for clues, for a potential failure. And I think that is the most important thing to do, to prevent, to try to avoid a tragedy. In Chimo, 10 people died, others 73 were missing, so we are talking about a large and catastrophic event. It was a very huge rock avalanche which happened in the end of June this summer in a quite remote area in Sichuan province. The landslide is very large. If you see those red spots on the deposition area, those are tracks. So imagine the size. The river was dammed for about 1 kilometer. The rock mass that displaced from the mountain crests, several million cubic meters, rushed along the slope for more than 2 kilometers until it completely submerged an entire village, killing most of its population. It's a big tragedy. And it triggered a national level response in terms of emergency in China. Also, a team from STIGP went to the site. Actually, Professor Xu, our deputy director, was appointed as leader of the on-site expert board for the geohazard assessment during the rescue operation. This photo has been taken by him. You really can see great detail, and a lot of work has been done in the very first days after the landslide, for example, to calculate the volume displaced, to find the geomorphological feature of this landslide.
Which are practically earthquakes that we have used, new technologies. We have used unarmed vehicles to define in the field the trajectory of rockfall and to be able to practically analyze in a more efficient way the effect of seismic rockfalls. Then, of course, I will show you some results of 3D analysis. So we have recorded almost 60 events in Greece for a period of practically 70 years. We have 40 sites, so we have consecutive 2 or 3 events in a specific site. And the frequency of the rockfalls is something which is very important. So if we consider we should be looking in terms of topographic effects, how we are going to deal with it in our analysis. So in terms of the magnitude source diagram, we can see a graph which was presented by Kiefer in 1984. This is proposed for landslides, but it can be also used for rockfalls. So the cases which are plotted below this curve are practically the cases where we have occurrence of seismic landslides.
The first presenter will be Professor Miyajima from Kanazawa University. His presentation entitled Liquefaction Damage to Residential Houses and its Effect to Health Problems of Residents in the 2018 16 Kumamoto earthquake in Japan.
For your detailed introduction. I'm Masakatsu Miyajima from Kanazawa University in Japan. Today I would like to talk to you about the liquefaction hazard in Japan. Title is Liquefaction Damage to Residential Houses and its Effect. We measure the inclination of the houses and the buildings induced by the soil liquefaction, and then we did a questionnaire survey for the residents in the liquefaction site. So finally, I would like to conclude my talk. So this is a map of Japan. Tokyo is located here, and the big earthquake occurred here, Kumamoto. And Ryukyu Island of the chairman is far from the south part of the Japan, but in Japan. And the building sank about 50 centimeters at the south part of the Kumamoto city. So we measured the inclination of the houses and the buildings in these areas. And this here shows the borehole logging. So the safety index of liquefaction was less than 1.0. So this vertical axis is the depth from the surface. So they are about 12 meters from the surface. The liquefaction may occur.
Done in Nepal, based on and then the below types, the type of tests that were carried out, the tests and measurements we did during the below test schemes, and then the results and the outcomes of those tests. After the Gorkha earthquake in 2015, and to mitigate future rockfall event related damages, we have proposed and we have completely installed 2 lines of defense. Location of the systems, the manufacture of the product being too much about them, product certification as per the IEAG 027 guideline, and the fully scale tested capacity of the installed fences, and this is hold, or rather hold back 9600 kg or 9.6 ton boulder, striking it directly at 90 kilometers per hour velocity, and for a 2000 kilojoule system, it's a 6.4 ton boulder. And install at the site. Foundation anchors for hinge systems used. We have 2 monobar anchors inclined at different orientations based on the product specification from the manufacturer, and we have a different system for the fixed systems. These are for the hinge systems and these are for the fixed systems. Next, this is the plan layout of the anchor positions. These show the retaining anchors in hinge systems, lateral anchors, and internal anchorages.
Was installed by Department Analysis Surface Impact Environment in the Department of Mines and Geology since 1978. In other remaining 46 stations are in collaboration with PMG, Caltech USA in that. So this is the map which concentrates the main shaft, aftershocks, and the aftershock sequence after the Gorkha earthquake. This is the main shaft. This is the aftershocks. These are the sequence of the aftershocks in this region. All the seismicity is concentrated towards Kathmandu passing and going to Sindupachok and Gola. But after these aftershocks in Kodari, so aftershocks are scattered around the main shaft region as well as towards north and south. This is the cumulative number of earthquakes, aftershocks after the birth earthquake, we can see that in the short zoom here, this is the main shock, and this is the largest aftershocks. Within the 3 months, we can see the cumulative number goes above 6,684. And the detailed view of this, up to now, we can see that after these aftershocks also, the aftershocks, here it is said the Kodari earthquake for this aftershocks also, because after that also we can see that so many number of aftershocks.
Impact-induced fragmentation model for predicting the runout of brittle fragmented rockfall.
I come from Southwest Georgia University from Sichuan province, China. Here today, my topic is impact-induced fragmentation model for predicting the runout of brittle fragmentable rockfall. I will show our academic thoughts through the following 5 parts. Here, let us look at this picture. Fragmentable rockfall is characterized by the separation of rock mass into very small pieces of fragments. After the rockfall collapsed from the hundreds or thousands of meters, the impact will cause the rockfall breakage and fragmentation. Also, they can cause the fragments of change of the rock the unaxial compressive tests and the free fall tests are carried out. Fracture. And under the high loading stage, there will be tensile cracks, and the flying fragments can get larger, huge velocity. To show something about fragmentation. Fragmentation in the rockfall always concentrating at the impacting zone.
My topic is about the introduction to the SMI rock engineering system. I will tell you about this system in 5 aspects. Its automation and enhance the reliability of the field investigation of rock mass. And we can reduce the cost and lighten the device for the field work. So this is the framework for the system. And this is 3 parts of composed this framework. And the first part is the design a stereo device for this system. The first one is the eNote. It works as the apps on the Android mobile phones. Gather the information together, and we upload all the information to the servers, and we have a series of calculation methods to process this data. The first part is the sensors. One is to measure the pressures between the 2 points. And the second one is the coders to calculate the distance between these 2 points. We work in the field. And then we treat it and we force the database to feed the servers. And then we collect all the data from the eNote. eNote has 2 functions. One is the data collector, and one is the measurement for the deep and the direction for the joint.
The small rockfall. As you can see the photograph on the bottom left, there's a pre-earthquake. There's a number of houses around there, and not much evidence that that slope is unstable. And then on the right-hand side, the houses in that area were destroyed. They were destroyed by the earthquake, not the landslide. People have moved out of those houses, but they're too afraid to go back because you can imagine that rockfall would be fairly terrifying. So people are reluctant to go back until they get some kind of assurance or risk management. So, let's show you at the bottom. But that wasn't actually affected by the landslide, that was earthquake damage. So what we try to do, if
Yeah, there we go. So there's two main areas. So the way that you've got the rock outcrop extending all the way across there, and you've got a favourable bit and an unfavourable bit compared with how the orientation of the joints are going and the orientation of the slope. What we've tried to do then, so we look at it in a kind of risk assessment way. We think we get high level damage, a lot of damage from big rockfall, and you pretty much expect rockfalls to occur from that area every year, every monsoon. I think it looks pretty loose. The joints are dilated. It looks as though it's going to keep coming down every year. So it's a pretty high risk location. So in terms of remediation and protection, we're probably thinking of rock bolting or meshing is probably going to be a bit expensive. We've got 7 houses. It's going to be it's going to be very costly. And so then we're looking at a kind of barrier type protection. Well, I don't know whether that could be gabions or whatever it can be done, or some specialist rock netting or whatever it is, catch fence. So again, high risk location, catastrophic damage from a landslide and a very high frequency, every monsoon, possibly get events. And so this one, trying to do a bit of back analysis, we haven't got any ground investigation, but we know the slope geometry and we know the type of failure. And so we back analysed some parameters and came up with this model for what happened during the monsoon. Pore pressures in the soil rise and you get that translational type failure.
This idea may be exemplified as written by a real tunnel route of metro tunnel, which is under construction now in the east of Moscow. It runs to the eastern suburbs of Moscow. As you can see, this route is quite favorable for construction. If it were built in the Jurassic clay, which is quite thick here, more than 10 meters thick. However, the shallow-seated decision was preferred, and the most of the tunnel route, so the construction cost rose significantly. So that is my conclusion. So maybe geological urban development. In cities, it is often difficult to change project decisions by moving construction to less risky environment.